Could see a procedural vote in the Senate on a bill that would codify Roe v. Wade, or more plainly speaking, attempting to pass a federal law guaranteeing the right to obtain an abortion in all 50 states. The plan is, in effect, an attempt to send a political message ahead of the midterms because Senate Democrats lack the votes. Joining us here in Washington, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks for having me.
First, I want to talk about this draft opinion. The White House hasn't really condemned the leak. Why is that?
Well, I don't like the way that this decision came out, but the outrage here should be about what's going to happen to women and families in this country. The fact that women and doctors are going to be sent to jail immediately when this opinion becomes a reality, if in these states with trigger laws, all of a sudden abortion under any circumstances, even under rape and incest, it becomes illegal and criminalized. So I don't love how the decision ultimately was made public, and I hope we figure out what happened. But I think it's interesting that many of my Republican friends are putting their focus on the process here because they really don't want to talk about the fact that abortion becoming criminalized is something that a sort of small minority of the country supports. 2/3 of this country is going to oppose an effort by the Supreme Court to fundamentally change the scope of women's health care access in this country.
So, and just to get process out of the way, are you concerned about the protests outside the homes of justices and what's happening with that? There's some websites that list all of their addresses. There are some tweets calling for assassinations. Should the president be speaking out about that?
Well, no one should be threatening violence against a Supreme Court justice or against any member of Congress. I will be honest, I have had plenty of protests right around the corner from my house over the course of my time in public service. But any threats of violence are beyond the pale.
All right, the Senate is set for this procedural vote this week on this bill that's failed once before to codify Roe, but several GOP senators, and you just heard Senator Graham talk about a narrower compromise. Why rule that out?
Well, and listen, I'm open to any potential pathway to codify Roe versus Wade, to get our nation's laws to where 67% of the American public are. And I think it's important that we put senators on record because let's be clear, Lindsey says this is about the decisions being made at the state level. That's not what's going to happen here. If Republicans get control of the House and the Senate and the White House, which certainly could happen in the next 3 years, they are absolutely going to pass a national ban on abortion that will affect every single family, every single woman in this country. And so it is important right now that we get every senator on the record. Do you support a woman's right to make decisions over their own body, or do you think that the government should be in charge? Because this is soon not going to be about state legislatures. Pretty soon, this is going to be an effort to pass a federal ban everywhere on abortions in this country.
So how much do you think this ruling, if it stands, affects the midterms for Democrats?
Well, I think it's going to be a huge turnout push, but not just for sort of Democrats, the big middle of the country. In fact, the majority of Republicans in this country oppose the full overturning of Roe versus Wade. So ultimately, I think this is going to push a lot of people to the polls this November that may have otherwise stayed home because they see that this fight is coming, not just in the state legislatures, but in Washington as well.
It's already having this impact. Progressive candidate Jessica Cisneros, she's challenging pro-life Democrat Henry Cuellar in Texas, and she says Democrats should stop supporting him over this. Take a listen.
With the House majority on the line, Cuellar could very much be the deciding vote on the future of reproductive rights in this country, and we just cannot afford that risk.
You put out a statement this week, and it says it's time to build upon the movement to elect pro-choice candidates up and down the ballot. So the question is, do you kick off pro-life candidate? Should Cuellar leave because he's a pro-life Democrat?
Well, I mean, that's up to the people of Texas. I don't make endorsements in
no, but I mean, your
other
statement
states' congressional elections.
It should be pro-choice up and down the ballot.
Well, listen, I support pro-choice candidates. I support pro-choice Democrats. I think we're better off if we have people in Congress that are going to support a woman's right to choose. But that doesn't mean that I'm going around the country endorsing in congressional races in Texas and other places.
Democratic candidate for Senate in Ohio, Tim Ryan, and other Democrats also say if this stands, that the Senate filibuster should go away. Senator Bernie Sanders says we must end the filibuster to pass it with 50 votes. You've said Democrats don't have the votes to end the filibuster, but, I mean, is this moot because you just don't have them?
Yeah, we don't have the votes right now. And frankly, I think the filibuster is fundamentally anti-democratic. I think if you win the control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, you probably should have the ability to enact your agenda. Frankly, whether you're the Democratic Party or the Republican Party.
And you'd have that same thought in the minority.
I would, and I think it's pretty clear to me that if Republicans get control of the Senate, they will get rid of the filibuster in order to pass a national ban on abortion. They got rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court justices for the explicit purpose of putting on the court judges who would strike down Roe versus Wade. And so I think you can naturally assume that they would also change the rules to pass that national abortion ban if they win control of the Senate in this next election.
So Senator Sanders also says he supports a primary challenge to moderate Kyrsten Sinema. Do you? Because she's against doing away with the filibuster?
Listen, I don't mind having a big tent, right? We can sort of argue these issues inside our party. I don't ever expect that we're going to have every single Democrat in the United States Senate supporting the same rule set that I support. I just think we should elect more Democrats. That's how we're going to solve this problem. Elect Democrats in this November election.
But not pro-life Democrats.
Who are going to support choice and support changing the laws of this country.
Yeah, so not that big tent. Pro-choice candidates.
Well, I support pro-choice candidates.
I got it.
So that's my priority.
This week, the president criticized some of the potential policies floated by Senator Rick Scott. He called them MAGA, and he talked about the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again movement. Take a listen.
This MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, in recent American history.
You agree with that statement and that effort politically? I mean, it has echoes of categorizing a whole bunch of people a certain way.
I mean, I am very concerned about the sort of very quick, hateful, divisive turn that the Republican Party has taken. This effort in Florida to sort of target gay kids in schools, I just think is mean-spirited and something that I had not seen from the Republican Party when I first started out in politics 20 years ago.
Well, hold on, I'm going to interrupt you. Yeah. To target gay kids in schools? I mean, the bill is about not talking about sexual identity from K through third grade. That's not targeting gay kids.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. It is sending a message to these kids that they are not worthy, that they should be ashamed of their identification.
It says, Senator, that you don't teach subjects with gender identity.
You don't think that those kids don't take a message from a ban on the discussion of their identity suggests that they are not worthy of existence in that school.
Senator,
half of trans kids in this country
about sexual identity.
Half of trans kids in this country have contemplated suicide, and that's because of the effort to bully them for their identity by adults in this country. Senator. So I absolutely do think that there's a message sent to these kids when you suggest that a conversation about their identity is somehow threatening the education of kids in our schools.
With your children, did you talk about sexual identity as a kindergartner? I mean, you don't talk about the birds and the bees, let alone the birds and the birds at that age, kindergarten through third grade.
So there was an amendment in the Florida legislature to ban sexual education in the early ages. That amendment failed because this wasn't about trying to protect children from a discussion about sex. This was an effort to specifically ban a conversation about topics related to sexual identity.
You were making a point that you think it's gone too far. I was saying half the country identified, at least with that movement, the policies of the Make America Great Again movement. And you think that that's a good, winning thing for the president to be doing politically heading into the midterms?
Well, again, I just have seen this turn in the Republican Party where they are not willing to support protections for our democracy. They're willing to install a president in the White House who didn't actually win either the popular or the electoral vote. They seem to be targeting vulnerable kids in a way that they didn't 10 or 20 years ago. I do think it's important to sort of talk about this very different element of the Republican Party that exists today that I don't think was the foundation of the party a couple decades ago.
Last thing, student loan forgiveness. This is a big debate, and you know, you talk about working families, you talk about folks who don't go to college, and you're talking about wiping out student debt. There is a former Education Department lawyer who served under President Obama who wrote, if this issue is litigated, the more persuasive analysis tends to support the conclusion that the executive branch likely does not have the unilateral authority to engage in mass student debt cancellation. Where are you? Does he have the authority, and are you for this?
I think he has the authority to do it. I would support a more limited forgiveness of debt. I'm one of the few members of the Senate that still has student debt. I don't need my debt forgiven. I also think that this focus on debt excuses the colleges for this dramatic increase in tuition. I sometimes think that our party spends a little bit too much time talking about the debt and not enough time talking about the cost of the degree, because that's where the real problem is. We're going to be in a perpetual cycle of having to forgive debt if college continues to spiral upwards to $100,000 a year. So I think a limited debt forgiveness proposal is legal. I would support it, but I think it's a mistake to put all of our eggs in that basket.
Senator Murphy, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.